Imagine a mother who, for 20 years, slept in a new city every night with her children. Every morning she woke up with a new name. "They're after us," she used to say. "Don't eat that food, it might be poisoned." But no one ever saw who they were. The darkness of the night, slowly moving trains at the station, and an old suitcase inside it, children's clothes, a few old photographs, and a handful of half-finished, fear-soaked dreams. A 10-year-old girl with questions in her eyes. A little brother who still couldn't understand why they changed homes every month. And a mother, her face always tired, her eyes always searching, as if a shadow was constantly following them. The story begins in Canada, a small town where an ordinary family once lived. The father, Varun, strict by nature but often violent when drunk. The mother, Ruth, quiet but breaking inside. And two children, Pauline and Eric. On the surface, everything seemed normal. House, school, work, but behind the walls of that home, something was slowly tearing the family apart. Every night, the father came home drunk, and the arguments began. "You always blame me," he would shout, "but you have no idea what I go through." Ruth stayed silent. She knew, answering back only meant more chaos. Pauline and Eric sat quietly behind the door, listening. For them it had become a nightly scene. Slowly, the distance between Ruth and Varun grew. Varun could only see alcohol and anger. Ruth could only see her children's future. One night, the fight went too far. Ruth grabbed both her children's hands and walked out, forever. It was night. The streets were empty, light rain falling, and an old car where the three of them sat. "Mom, where are we going?" Pauline asked. "To a place where no one can ever find us." At that moment, the children had no idea how many years of fear and secrets were hidden behind that answer. Over the next few weeks, they arrived in a new city. Ruth changed her name, and the children's names too. A new school for Pauline, a new house, new neighbors, everything new. But her mother's fear was still the same. She didn't talk much to anyone. She would sit by the window, always watching, as if someone was watching her. At night she checked the door 3 times. When she cooked, she tasted the food first, then gave it to the kids. Sometimes suddenly, she'd say, "We have to leave tonight." And within hours, everything would be packed again. Pauline couldn't understand what danger followed them everywhere. But she never asked. Time passed. Pauline was now 12. New people, new schools in every city. But her mother's fear never faded. And one day when Pauline asked, "Does someone want to hurt us?" Ruth replied softly, "Yes. There are people who will never let us live in peace." Pauline was terrified, but she believed her mother, because all these years, she had seen how cautious Ruth was, as if she knew something no one else did. This running life had now become their life. Sometimes a rented room, sometimes a hotel, sometimes a temporary stay at a friend's place. Every 2 or 3 months, everything changed. City, name, and memories. Pauline was growing up now, but one question kept growing with her. Who are we running from? She wanted to know what this fear really was. Because every night when her mother locked the door, there was never anyone outside. The streets were empty, silence heavy. Yet her mother's eyes always carried that same old fear. Maybe that fear was about to become the mystery of this story. Because what was coming next wasn't about a gang, or the mafia, or a killer. It was about a darkness hidden inside a human mind, a darkness that would swallow an entire family's life. But that's the story for later. For now, the only question is, who was Ruth running from? Days passed, cities changed, but Pauline's life stood still, trapped in a journey with no destination. Every few months, the same scene repeated. "Pack quickly, we have to leave," Ruth would say. Pauline and Eric, without a word, would grab their small bags, a few clothes, a few toys, and sit in the car. Outside, fog-covered roads, flickering streetlights, and their mother's silent face. That had become their life. Sometimes Montreal, sometimes Halifax, sometimes an unknown small town. In every city, Ruth took a new name, a new identity, sometimes Miss Lewis, sometimes Mrs. Grant. Pauline and Eric too got new names, Anna and Chris. "We recently moved from another city," she would say. And after a few weeks they'd move again. Pauline no longer remembered her real birthday. Every time she went to school, it was under a new name, in a new uniform, among new friends, but no friend ever stayed for long. "We're not safe here," her mother would whisper. One night when Pauline was 10, she asked, "Mom, will we always keep running like this?" Ruth said softly, "Until they find us, yes." Pauline shivered. "Who are they?" Ruth looked deep into her eyes and said, "The people who wanted to kill your father, now they want to kill us too." As a child, Pauline had never seen any enemies, but the fear in her mother's eyes was real. That fear followed Ruth like a shadow. Every night Ruth checked the door 3 times, straightened the folds of the curtain, and whispered, "Turn off the lights, someone's outside." Pauline would peek through the window. No one there. Just a tree swaying in the wind, and a lonely street. Slowly that fear crept into the children's hearts too. Every stranger looked suspicious. Every car horn sounded like a signal from a pursuer. Eric even stopped sleeping with his back to the door. One evening Pauline came home from school to find the house in chaos. "We have to leave now," her mother said, trembling. Someone moved the curtains. The curtains had just moved, because of the wind, but Ruth's eyes were filled with conviction, as if she had seen someone. Pauline was beginning to understand. Something wasn't right, but she hung between belief and doubt. Sometimes she thought her mother was right. Sometimes she thought her mother was trapped in a fear that wasn't real. Then one day, Ruth said, "From today our names will change again. If anyone asks, tell them we're from another country." "Mom," Pauline asked, "why can't I keep my real name?" "Because your old name is in danger now," Ruth replied. Time went on. Pauline was now a teenager. In every new city, she started over, but every ending was the same: fear. Her mother's face looked more tired than ever. Sometimes she laughed for no reason, then suddenly fell silent. Sometimes she said, "I think they've tapped our phones." Sometimes the neighbor across the street, "He's one of them." Pauline and Eric just nodded silently. They no longer asked questions. At night, Pauline often lay awake wondering, is someone really after us, or is it all just in Mom's mind? If what she said was true, why had no one ever found them? And if it was false, why was she doing this? In every city, Ruth saw signs. Sometimes an article in a newspaper would make her whisper, "Look, it's them." Sometimes she'd see a strange car and say, "They've found." Pauline's life was now completely wrapped in fear. A fear that had no face, no proof, only the trembling certainty in her mother's eyes. A fear that cannot be seen, only felt. One day, Pauline saw her mother standing silently by the window. She stared outside for a long time, then said softly, "If I'm ever gone, remember, never trust anyone." Pauline's heart sank. She couldn't understand. There was something in her mother's eyes, a madness that had gone far beyond fear. And then it happened again, the same as always. Sudden packing, hurriedly gathering their belongings, and a new name for a new place. "This time, we have to go north," Ruth said. "We'll be safe there." By now, this running had become a habit for Pauline. But inside her one question kept echoing again and again. If no one is following us, then who is my mother running from? Every time she thought maybe this would be the last time. Maybe now they would finally stop. But every time it was the same. A new city, a new identity, a new fear. Sometimes, at night, when everyone was asleep, Pauline looked out the window. The streets were empty. In the distance, a billboard flickered faintly. There was only a soft whisper of wind in the air. And then for a moment, she felt maybe her mother was right. Maybe someone was out there watching them. But who was it? Only time was going to answer that question. Because soon Pauline was about to learn a truth that would shake every memory, every fear, and every ounce of trust she had ever known. After years of drifting, for the first time in her life, there was a bit of calm. Pauline was now 25 years old. She worked at a small newspaper, the New Brunswick Times. Dozens of stories passed across her desk every day, but her own life was like a newspaper headline, mysterious, unfinished, and full of questions. Many nights, on her way home from the office, she wondered, had the old fears finally ended, or were they just hiding for a while? Then one day everything changed. One afternoon at work, the phone rang. The name on the screen, Mom. Ruth hadn't contacted her in weeks. Pauline answered quickly. "Hello, Mom?" There was silence for a few moments. Then came Ruth's tired, fragile voice. "Pauline, it's time. You need to know everything." Pauline's heart began to race. Night was slowly falling as she started her car and drove down the empty highway. Fog hung thick all around. The street lamps flickered faintly, and the air felt cold and heavy. Her heart beat fast, a mixture of fear and hope. The highway motel stood on the outskirts of town, broken neon lights, peeling walls, and a silence that felt almost alive. A dim light shimmered from one of the windows. Pauline knocked softly. A faint voice from inside. "Come in, Pauline." As she stepped in, a stale smell of old smoke and damp air filled her nose. A small lamp flickered on the table, as if the power could go out any second. Ruth was there, the same tired face, the same frightened eyes. But this time, she wasn't alone. Next to her sat a man, around 50, tall, with a cold, emotionless face. Ruth spoke softly. "Pauline, this is Stan. He's the one who has kept us safe all these years." Pauline looked at the man in surprise. Stan gave a faint smile. "I've been with your mother for a long time. If it weren't for me, you probably wouldn't be here today." Pauline couldn't say a word. Ruth's voice trembled. "You're grown now, and it's time you know the truth. The people we've been running from, they're not ordinary. They're the mafia." Pauline's eyes widened. "The mafia?" Ruth nodded slowly. "Yes. Your father had some connections with dangerous people. When he tried to leave that world, they killed him. And since then we've been their next targets." For a few moments the room fell silent. Outside, the wind grew stronger, rattling the glass windows. Pauline looked at her mother. Her eyes held truth, but also a strange unease. "We've hidden ourselves with great difficulty," Ruth continued. "In every city, we had to take new names. I've seen them following us many times." Pauline finally turned to look closely at Stan. There was no softness in his eyes, only a cold certainty. His face was stern. His words smelled faintly of fear. "Did you ever tell the police?" Pauline asked hesitantly. Stan shot her a sharp glance. "The police can't be trusted. They're everywhere," he said firmly. Pauline fell silent. Her mother took her hand. "Now you understand why I kept changing cities. Why your name changed every time. We couldn't talk to anyone. Everyone was suspicious." Pauline's throat went dry. She wanted to believe her mother, but deep inside, doubt was growing. In all these years, she had never once seen anyone follow them. No threats, no attacks, only the constant fear that lived in her mother's eyes. She looked at Stan again. He leaned forward slightly, his tone heavy and commanding. "Pauline, if you talk to anyone about this, our location could be exposed. Understand? We can only trust the three of us." Pauline nodded slowly, but something about him felt wrong. His voice carried authority. Too much authority. It wasn't the tone of a protector. It was the tone of control. "He's done everything for us, Pauline. Don't doubt him," Ruth said. "Mom, have you ever thought that maybe all this could be your imagination?" Pauline asked gently. "You have no idea what we've seen, Pauline. You still don't understand. They're everywhere," Ruth snapped. Pauline didn't know what to think anymore. Was this her mother's fear, or Stan's influence? It was as if both of them were trapped in a dark web, pulling her into it too. Outside, the rain had started. The lamp's light grew weaker. Stan glanced toward the door. "We have to go," he said firmly. "It's not safe here anymore." Pauline looked at her mother. Ruth whispered, "To a new place, where no one can find us." Pauline's heart sank. Even after all these years, the same fear, the same journey, the same running. That night, as she drove away from the motel, she felt like she had gone back to her childhood, a life that kept running like an unfinished story. But this time it was different. She was no longer a child. She was ready to ask questions, because now she suspected, maybe the real danger wasn't outside, maybe it was within. When Pauline returned home that night, her mind wouldn't rest. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Her mother's words, "The mafia is after us," kept echoing in her head. But alongside them, she couldn't shake the image of Stan's cold, stern face, filled with something unsettling. At home, Pauline looked at herself in the mirror for the first time. There was exhaustion on her face, but in her eyes, there was something else. Questions. Questions that had been buried for years were now rising loudly inside her. Was anyone really after them, or were her mother and Stan prisoners of their own fear? In the next few days, Pauline made a decision. She wouldn't run anymore. She would search for the truth. She went into the old file room at her office, digging through newspaper archives from the... She turned every page, looking for anything connected to Varun Lewis or Ruth Lewis. Any crime, any mafia case, anything at all. There was nothing. No report, no name, no record, nothing. She even contacted the local police. Did any woman ever report a threat from the mafia? She asked. The constable checked the old files, then shook his head. No one. Now doubt in Pauline's eyes turned into cold certainty. If none of it was true, then why had her mother lived in fear for so many years? Maybe that fear had been planted inside her and nurtured by. During the day, Pauline worked. At night, she wrote in her notebook her memories, every city, every change, every strange event. She wrote about the time her mother threw away an entire meal, saying someone poisoned it. The night she woke them and drove into the mountains, whispering, "They're watching us." The time she covered the entire floor of their new house with plastic, claiming they've put chemicals in the ground. Every line was soaked in fear. But now, Pauline was turning that fear into words, and with each word, she was getting closer to the truth. One evening, Pauline decided to test Stan. She created a story. That night, she called her mother. "Mom, I'm scared," she said. "I think someone broke into my house." "Are you okay?" Ruth asked, panicking. "Yes, but I think someone opened my window." The curtains were moving. Pauline hung up. She just wanted to see what would happen next. 2 hours later, there was a loud knock on the door. Pauline opened it, and there stood Stan and Ruth. Ruth's face was pale with fear. Stan held a bag and a handgun. "Where are they?" he barked. "The people who tried to break into your house." "There was no one," Pauline said quietly. "I just saw the curtains move." Stan's face turned white. "So they tried again," he muttered. "I told you, Ruth. Now they're after her too." Ruth was trembling. "Stan, we have to leave immediately," she whispered. Pauline stood still, watching. It was like a scene unfolding before her eyes. Stan looked around the room quickly, scanning the floor, the windows, the curtains, as if someone was really hiding there. "If they've tracked us again," Stan said, "then I'll know exactly where they are." "Stan, have you ever actually seen those people?" Pauline asked. "Yes, many times," he replied, "but they always manage to escape. They have a system. They're everywhere." "Then why isn't there any mention of them in any report? Why has no one ever seen them?" "Because they don't leave traces." "You wouldn't understand, Pauline." "Stop it, Stan," she said sharply. "Are you helping us, or are you just trying to scare her?" The room fell silent. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Stan's eyes burned with anger. "For years you both have been repeating the same story. But if those people are real, why only target your life? Why not anyone else?" Stan slowly stepped back. "You don't know how they operate." "No, Stan," Pauline said quietly. "I think I'm beginning to understand a lot." That night, Pauline couldn't sleep. She kept thinking, if all this was a lie, then why had her mother believed it for so many years? Had Stan planted the fear in her mind, or was her mother suffering from an illness, a fear not born from reality, but from imagination? The next day, Pauline made an appointment with a psychiatrist. "I need to talk about my mother and her companion," she said. "There are strange things I've noticed." The doctor listened carefully, then said softly, "Do you know that some people suffer from persecutory delusion? They believe that someone is trying to harm them, even when there's no evidence." "You mean my mother?" "It's possible," the doctor said, "but the person who fuels that delusion is even more dangerous." Stan's face flashed in Pauline's mind. The man who always said, "I saved you." But maybe he was the real reason this family lived in fear for so long. Over the next few days, Pauline started connecting everything. Her mother's fears, Stan's lies, and their pattern of supposed threats. Every time her mother said they needed to run, Stan was already prepared. Every city, the same story, the same excuses, as if everything had been pre-planned. "Mom, have you ever thought that maybe the danger isn't from others, but from Stan?" "Pauline, he's saving us. Or is he scaring us?" "He's not sick, Pauline. He's just cautious." "Mom, caution is different from fear. You lost your life, our childhood, all to a man's paranoia who might just be insane." A few days later, Pauline tested Stan again. "Someone at my office asked about my address," she told him over the phone. "I told you. They're still tracking us. Leave immediately." "Mom," Pauline said firmly, "we don't need to run anymore. Because the people you're running from, they don't exist." "Then who have we been afraid of all these years?" "Of Stan." And the fear he created. There was a flicker in Ruth's eyes, as if for the first time she realized that she had lived in darkness that never even existed. And at that moment Pauline understood the truth. The danger was never outside. It was always within. Pauline hadn't been sleeping for nights. Every time she closed her eyes, childhood images returned. The running, her mother's trembling face, the locked doors, the drawn curtains, and Stan's cold voice. They're watching us. Now that the truth was out, only one question echoed inside her. If they never existed, then who were we running from all these years? 2 days later, she visited the psychiatrist again. You seem more ready this time, he said. Yes, she nodded. I need to tell you everything from childhood till now. She spoke non-stop. Every city, every fake name, every fear, every escape. Her mother's screams, Stan's warnings, and that constant feeling of being watched. The doctor sat silently, sometimes nodding, sometimes taking notes. When Pauline finally finished, he stayed quiet for a while, then said, Pauline, your story is very painful, but the root of it is clear. Stan had delusional disorder, persecutory type. It's a mental illness where a person believes that someone is plotting to harm them. They start seeing danger everywhere. For them, the illusion becomes reality. So he really believed the mafia was after us. Yes, said the doctor. For him, that fear was real. He was truly trying to protect you and your mother. But in reality, he was imprisoning you in that fear. Your mother trusted him, the doctor continued. She started to feel the same fear, because she emotionally depended on him. Sometimes, when someone you love deeply believes in something, even their delusions start feeling real to you. Your mother began to live inside his delusion. So all those years of running, it was all for nothing. Not nothing, the doctor said gently, but wasted because of an illness. The fear they felt was real for them, just not for the world. Pauline's voice broke. We lost everything. My mother's laughter, our childhood, our identity, all because someone turned his sick imagination into truth. The doctor nodded. Such illnesses are dangerous, because they're hard to recognize. Stan thought he was saving you, but he was actually terrifying you. And your mother, already emotionally fragile, found comfort in that fear. She thought fear was safety. Could they have been cured? Pauline asked. Maybe, the doctor said, if treatment had come early. But when delusion becomes someone's reality, even treatment struggles to reach them. Stan never accepted he was ill, and Ruth, she became his victim. I've seen him, Pauline whispered. He connected everything to danger. A car passing by, a neighbor's laughter, a phone call. He'd say, see, they're tracking us, and my mother believed him. The doctor nodded. That's called shared delusion. When one person's fear becomes another's belief, no one lies. Both believe it's true. So my mother wasn't lying. No, said the doctor. She had just accepted someone else's truth as her own. Now Pauline finally understood. All those years of fear, running, changing names, locked windows, it was all part of an illness. Stan had created a world in his mind, a world where the mafia was everywhere, and safety only existed in escape. Ruth had made that world her reality. 3 lives had been consumed by a fear that never existed. No one was chasing them. There was no enemy. Only one man's sick imagination that devoured an entire family. Could he ever have been cured? Pauline asked quietly. Only if he'd accepted he was ill, said the doctor. But with delusional disorder, the hardest part is that the patient believes everyone else is crazy, not him. Tears filled Pauline's eyes. Now she understood every one of her mother's choices. The trembling hands, the restless eyes, the constant fixing of curtains, all shadows of that delusion. When Pauline left the clinic that day, the sky was dim and the air was cold, but she felt a strange peace. For the first time she wasn't running. She stopped, breathed deeply, and whispered, there was no mafia, no danger, just a fear that ate us from the inside. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but there was a faint smile too, because now she knew the cure for fear wasn't running away. It was facing the truth. Mom, you're safe now, she whispered. And with that the fear that had lived for decades slowly faded into silence. Years passed. Even after the truth came out, Pauline's life still carried that emptiness, the silence, the hollow spaces, and sometimes the same old memories drifting around her like smoke. But the difference was, she no longer ran from them. She looked at them, understood them, and slowly learned to let them go. One day she received a call. "Pauline, your mother's very ill." Without hesitation, she rushed to the hospital. Ruth was in the ICU, frail, wrinkled, but her eyes still held that same innocent softness. "You came?" "Yes, Mom. I came. I gave you so much pain, Pauline. I just wanted to protect you. I mistook lies for truth, but for me, they were real. Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. You were just living inside someone else's fear." "Sometimes I still hear voices, like someone's calling us. That's just the echo of the past, Mom. There's no one now. We're safe. You don't hate me, do you?" "No, Mom. Not anymore. Because I finally understand. You weren't the criminal. You were the victim too." After her mother passed, Pauline looked into Stan's life. He lived alone in a small town. No family, no friends. The doctors said his mental illness had worsened. "They'll come back," he would mutter over and over. Gradually, his health declined, and one day he died, just as he had lived, trapped inside his own delusion. When Pauline heard the news, she stayed silent for a long while. Maybe, she thought, that was his release. The man whose sick mind had destroyed 3 lives had finally been consumed by his own fear. Months later, Pauline returned to her mother's old house. There was the same old trunk, some unfinished letters, and a few photographs. In one, Ruth and Stan were smiling. On the back it said, "A new start, 1983. "Yes," Pauline whispered. "Maybe for you the new start ended right there." She sat by the window, the same window where Ruth used to stand, staring outside, thinking someone was watching them. Now it was open. The air came in, cool, clean and peaceful. Mom chose to live in fear because that was her truth. Stan created fear because it gave him control. And I grew up inside that fear, but now I have the courage to understand it. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Mom. No one's coming for us now." That night, Pauline wrote in her diary one last time, "Sometimes the greatest prison isn't made of walls. It's built inside the mind, where we become prisoners of our own fear, believing the enemy is outside, when in truth the enemy lives within." The moon was clear in the sky. No shadows. For the first time she felt true peace. No fear, no pursuit, no false danger, only calm, the kind that comes when a person stops running from their past and learns to forgive it. Good night, Mom. The fear that had lived for 3 lifetimes was finally dead.